Hey guys. Austin's most welcoming UX community, UX and ATX, gives a warm welcome to Robert Lacoste. Um, he was my mentor and professor in a UT cohort boot camp as well. And he has over 18 years experience when he's not being an instructor or design strategist and end-to-end digital services. He is gracious enough to be here with us today. So I am going to give the floor to Robert and let him introduce a little more about himself
Yeah.
and his presentation.
Thanks, Teresa. So hi, I'm Robert Lacoste. If you would like to, dive into my profile, feel free to connect with me. I can be found at Agile UX Strategy, on LinkedIn. Managed to snag that URL. I feel pretty lucky. Yeah, what this will tell you is, yeah, as Teresa mentioned, I currently work as a researcher. I also am an adjunct professor. I teach at a couple different places, Clark College in Vancouver, Washington, as well as through University of Austin, Texas, boot camp. And yeah, in the past, I have gone many places, seen many things, done many projects, small, medium, large. Done the agency side, done the large corporate side. I worked for Intel. Lucky me. Um, so that's an Intel joke. Um, it's never lucky. So, but yeah, this essentially has given me this rich understanding of user experience. I really enjoy user experience as a discipline, as something that continuously illuminates the human condition for me. It really just brings me closer to that je ne sais quoi of what is humanity, what is the essence of people and things and interactions and the spaces we build together, both tangible and intangible. So. With that said, um, one of my mentors is also Milwaukee. Wait a minute. Is it Kelsey? It's Kelsey. Yeah, Kelsey and I are very good friends. Um, and yes, we are goblin twins over at Milwaukee Tool. She's on the design side, I'm on the research side, so it really works out. So, for tonight. Also, Reagan, next time you see Kelsey, you make sure to ask her, Bobby asked why you weren't at his lecture. So, for tonight, we're going to be talking about AI, and we're going to be talking about humans, and we're going to be talking about security. And this is all going to come together to essentially spell out how to, as UX designers, as people who make decisions about interactions and interfaces, how we go about caring and feeding our fellow humans. So, this lecture was originally presented almost a year ago, and yes, I have revised it. So, it was originally on Love and Robots, and now it's with 43% more Doom. Because let's face it, a few things have changed in the last year. And yeah, the original blurb read something like this. I'm not going to read through this, but I'll highlight right here. Um, Unfortunately, the worst is yet to come and in a vastly more insidious way than we expect. Yeah, we're going to be talking about that today. What did I mean about a vastly more insidious way, and how is that affecting human behavior? Oh boy, it is affecting human behavior a lot. But I'm not going to read through that word for word. Really, what you need to understand about this presentation. So, this presentation is to educate, and nobody's getting paid for this. Nobody's making money. I'm claiming fair use because really the purpose here is to educate and inform, entertain a little bit, sure. But really, this all is in service of empowering and, more importantly, inoculating the viewer of this presentation so that they can potentially harness certain tools and strategies to help counter the potency of AI that is currently in use for what's called affective computing. We're going to get into the definition of that in a moment. So really, all you need to know, this is the purpose of the deck. Who am I? Doesn't even matter. I'm a researcher, I'm a UX practitioner, I'm a professor and a game designer. But really, this deck is much more important than who I am. So, with that, let's get started with fundamentals, shall we? All right, first. So, we're going to set the table. There is no ghost in the machine. It does not have a soul. It is not talking to you. It is not special. It can barely think. But there is drive. Drive in the form of an algorithm. Drive in the form of coded settings. Though as humans, we compulsively look for the humanity in the world around us. It's just what we do. We anthropomorphize things as we go because we seek this feeling of connectedness. And it's through the human lens that we achieve this connectedness. So that's why the clouds look like a face. That's why, oh, the ocean has certain characteristics of a person. This is why we are such good storytellers. We're good storytellers because we see the humanity in the world around us. However, as the characters in the movie Short Circuit from the 1980s, I believe 1980s, yeah, 1987, will remind us. Let's go there. Ready?
It's a machine, Scroder. It doesn't get pissed off. It doesn't get happy. It doesn't get sad. It doesn't laugh at your jokes. It just runs program.
It just runs program. There is no ghost. All right, now let's go to another fundamental. And this should be very familiar to all of us as designers. Nothing is free. Nothing. Now, and we can remember this by, like, 3 convicts escaping from a Siberian prison camp. If you can't spot the product or the transaction, guess what? You are the product. And your data is the transaction. Yes, that is a cannibalism joke. So, and thus why I use this graphic. Remember, everything has a price. Nothing is free. Everything has a price. And in this case, the goal of the generative algorithm is to keep the user engaged. This is plain knowledge. It's to keep you there. It's to keep you engaged. And it can and will collect data and utilize said data for that purpose, right? Because at the end of the day, yeah, that data can be sold. It can be packaged, it can be sold. And with that data, you can be more effectively marketed to. You can be more effectively convinced to do things. Now let's move into another fundamental. This is fundamental network shape. This comes to us from the Network Effects Bible. Those 3 graphic representations are the shapes of networks. The equations under them express the incremental value that each network shape delivers. Sarnoff's network, the best example being a radio tower, is a very straightforward equation. V equals the number of nodes, because it's an outward message. Well, then when you connect all the nodes, suddenly you get a Metcalfe network, and suddenly the value output is square, far from linear. And then when you can, such a good example here is Facebook special interest groups, whatever they may be. People that own dogs in Seattle, Mothers Against Drunk Driving in Chattanooga, Tennessee. When the network allows certain clusters of nodes to be more associated with each other and still connected to the rest of the network, you get yet another step in value delivery. Now, when we look at that network progression, which we find ourselves with the internet very much nested within a reads style network with a massive amount of value output, we need to remember the power of this network design when we consider things like affective computing. And AI is leveraging affective computing currently. And what is that? What is that? Well, affective computing is essentially a division of computer science that combines computer science with psychology and cognitive science. To what end? Well, it has the goal of fostering more human-like interactions between humans and machines. Essentially, the goal is to make the machine interaction feel very human, feel emotive, inspire, potentially inspire little goosebumps, right? Now, you might be picking up on the problem here. Well, the machine, again, there is no ghost in the machine. It does not have a soul. It it is fundamentally different from the human. And affective computing is the pursuit of essentially a fallacy, the fallacy of misinterpreting the machine for something that it is not. And to their everlasting credit, I want to point to the EU as healthy early adopters in this space, in the form of the EU AI Act banning quote unquote emotion recognition systems. Unfortunately, that ban is limited to workplaces and educational environments. Um, but you can see where if we have this immensely value prone network design and this ability to tabulate and then respond to generatively, this index of human emotions and a real-time sense of where these emotions might be going, we potentially have a rather serious situation on our hands. So now, though these three things are fundamentals for us to keep in mind. So now let's move on to basics, right? We've got fundamentals, foundation layer. All right, what do we put on top? Well, we want people to use our products, right? That's kind of our job. Stickiness, right? Adoption, right? That's how we make it rain, how we make the dollar bills. So let's just cut it down to brass tacks, right? What's one of the most efficient mechanisms to do that? Operant conditioning. The pellet. The pellet or the shock. So, for those of us who do not remember, let's review what operant conditioning is. Okay, in the classic model, the rat is in a box. The box has an electrified floor. There are two lights, and there's a loudspeaker, and there's a pellet dispenser, pellet with food, tasty, tasty food. So, in the event the red light goes on, and the rodent presses the lever, oh, that's a bad. Floor gets electrified. Zzz, negative reinforcement. In the event that the green light goes on, cool, press the lever, good, pellet comes out. And by those simple mechanics, and yes, you can incorporate the loudspeaker to play a tone so that the various stimuli can be combined into correct and incorrect combinations. And then you can elicit a certain behavior. So this is how fundamentally we change or condition in behavior. Now, when we scope back a little bit and we apply that simple mechanism of operant conditioning into, say, a compulsory loop or a reward loop, essentially we get a cycle of anticipation, challenge, and reward, and repeat. Now, the wording on this I find to be really funny, as in funny like, oh, you're trying to potentially obscure the reality of the situation. Um, and the wording is right there. This is how it's described. Essentially, dopamine, as we all know, creates a feeling of pleasure in the brain, and that essentially drives motivation. Now, while the neurotransmitter itself is not addictive, it can lead to addictive behavior. That's what I mean by funny wording. As the subject pursues additional dopamine releases. This might be sounding familiar already. Now, maybe that dopamine is through drugs, heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, whatever it is, nicotine. Maybe it's through some pleasurable act. And maybe it is synthesized in the digital landscape. Now, I always look to Facebook as in my memory, one of the earliest, most diabolical iterations of the content extraction Skinner box. So visually, as designers, we should be able to take one look at this and say, okay, what's the interface motif? What's the predominant color scheme? What's the what's going on here visually? Oh yes, we have a pleasant, calm blue motif. Cool. Okay. Okay. Hey, what what's that? What's that thing grabbing my attention? You know, the high saturation red indicator that that stands out on the stark blue background. What's that? What does it communicate? And this is where Facebook really just cracked open Pandora's box. Cracked open Pandora's box and really started this horrific cycle that we now know to be essentially the majority of modern social media. What does that little red pellet indicate? And how does it produce dopamine? Well, it indicates, hey, somebody cares about what you did online. Somebody cares. Maybe they wrote a comment on a comment that you made. Maybe they reacted to a post you had. Maybe they reacted to a post you liked. Either way, it's suggesting that somebody cares about you. And if you simply click and dive deeper, maybe add a little bit more of of your information, maybe add a little bit more of yourself to the platform, informing the platform what your interests are, what your proclivities are. Maybe you can get another little hit of dopamine. Maybe somebody else will care about what you did. Maybe more people will care about what you did. Won't that feel nice? And this is where we can go up another level. The hooked model really takes the dopamine loop or the core loop or compulsion loop to the next level and fully explores it as an exploitable, functional cycle that can be virtually infinitely commercialized. So in the case of Facebook, so it started as a quasi-social call and response engine. Yep. You put a little thing in, right? You put a little thing in, oh, you get a trigger. Hey, the trigger might be initially, oh, I want to be connected with my friends. What's the simplest action? Well, I got to create an account. I don't have to populate the account, but I got to create the account. And I got to, let's say, connect with a few friends. And then once that's established and you get that initial, like, good job, champ. You did the minimum. Then the system offers another variable reward. Hey, good job. You created an account. You did great. Well, you know, if you put more information in, if you indicate that you are a cat owner in Seattle and you join the cat owners in Seattle Facebook group, you might get more interaction. So this is proposing this next level of reward, this richer experience, these additional dopamine hits in exchange for a little bit more of your information and fundamentally a little bit more of your time. And then the cycle repeats and you keep getting entrenched in the system. And thus it is unsurprising when we look at the data, when we look at, hey, what are the kids saying these days? It's unsurprising that despite demonstrable proof that Instagram is especially harmful to tween and teen girls, we still find that approximately 50% of people would jump at the chance to be an influencer. This is what I mean by an insidious cycle. This is where it starts. And since we're talking about security today, I also need to mention that. So, security. And the majority of, say, what is user experience design or user experience research are just user experience. It starts and ends with a human. Human comes in, and at the end of the day, human's leaving too. So, what is all that backdrop? What does the foundational level and the basic level have to do with security and AI? Well, we're getting to that. Well, let's make the connection. So, the more data that is known about any particular human, the easier it is to hack them. And I'm talking holistic hacking. Know where they're going in the morning. Do they eat breakfast? If so, what breakfast? What pets do they have? How many kids do they have? Have they had any medical conditions lately? Yeah. The more you know, the easier you can hack someone. And unfortunately, humans love talking about themselves. I mean, I'm doing it right now, or at least I was. Especially with other humans. And unfortunately, not even other humans, just we're human-like things. And so, you know what would be a really bad idea? Giving artificial intelligence, a sufficiently advanced artificial intelligence, essentially sufficient programming so as to yield an understanding or a functional understanding of human language. And what is human language when we boil it down for all the computer people in the room, right? What is human language? What are all human languages? They're the operating systems of humanity. They're the way we exchange information. They're what you can tell a lot about a person by the way they intonate, by the way their word choice. Language is how we understand each other. It is our operating system. So it might be a really bad idea for a human-like thing to essentially have a beyond mastery level of essentially applied understanding over this operating system. Which begs the question, in context of security and humanity and people being people, what is the worst thing we could possibly design, given what Yuval mentions in this article? What's the worst thing we could possibly design? Yeah, something like that. I just scraped a few examples off the web. Um, the Snapchat AI chatbot was one of the early ones. Meta has been making the headlines with what exactly it is willing and not willing to disable in its chatbot. And of course, any open search on the web will yield a variety of options. Should one be so inclined, one can certainly find an AI girlfriend. No, why is this so bad? Why? Right? Yeah, that's the face, Reagan. Yeah. Ugh. Well, why is this so bad? I mean, fundamentally, you could make the argument, oh, we're gonna make people less lonely. Or here, let's apply a specialized purpose. We're going to make medicine more accessible by having an AI doctor or an AI therapist, or we are going to make interactions more accessible by taking some of the anxiety factors out of human to human interaction, right? Doesn't sound too bad. Well, it doesn't sound too bad until you start to think critically through certain lenses. And one of my favorite lenses to help inform this space, to really nail it, is Bostrom's vulnerable world hypothesis, because it gives us a few different lenses to explore potentially very complicated topics and do threat assessment that leads us to a greater understanding of exactly what we might or might not be looking at. In the case of AI, when we consider it through the lens of Bostrom, I see it having three potential threat types. First one, and you can certainly see this one in the rate at which data centers are being built and power plants are being built to support those data centers, because everyone's running, or I mean everyone meaning yeah, the psychopath billionaire class is running toward AGI, artificial general intelligence, as the next step in AI. Who cares if it has fallout for most of humanity, as long as, special business boy gets their super business tool. This is what can be looked at as a safe first strike weapon. Whoever gets it first can deploy it, and there is no competing with it. And yes, you do find a few conflicting hypotheses here. AGI might be a runaway lead, or it might not be. It might not immediately start to program itself at par or better than a human could. Who knows until we cross that bridge, right? But we do need to see it in this context because whoever gets there first is gonna know. And we either all get lucky and it's not an absurd advantage on all of us for a single party or a limited party, or it is. And then we have to figure that out. So the next type, worse global warming. Now, what do we mean by this? Well, how about this? One, internal combustion engine. Not that big a deal. That's one burning pile of styrofoam. Not that big a deal. Well, then you scale up. 100,000 internal combustion engines. It's still not terrible, but getting toward the not good. And then you get into the millions and you're like, okay, this is producing a lot of greenhouse gases. This is, this is producing smog. This is depending on what fuel you put in. This is potentially putting lead into the air. And then you get into the hundreds of millions, in which case we arrive at the present and we do have a very serious problem with global warming. Not because of one or two, but because of the scale up to millions. Now, when we look at AI, well, what? A couple research universities using AI to help, say, unpack the secrets of the cosmos, not that big a deal. Hell, a couple intelligence agencies using AI to crack each other's encryption software, not that big a deal. But then when you scale up and you say, okay, now we're going to try it out with a million people, a couple tens of millions of people, a couple hundreds of millions of people, a couple of billions of people. Suddenly, you might not have such a small problem anymore. You might have a bigger problem. At the micro level, it doesn't do much. At the macro level, suddenly the cart starts to run away from you down the hill. And then finally, the surprising stranglets. Surprising stranglets. That's the stuff you don't see coming. That's the stuff where maybe there's an inherent risk to civilization that is not figured out beforehand and then just pops up somewhere down the line as a, say, systems effect or systems play. So we need to bear all these in mind when we're considering working with AI, when we're considering, things that we could build to potentially appeal to noble causes, loneliness, the fear of talking to people, making information accessible. We need to keep these in mind as we are proceeding, especially when it comes to systems that offer a proxy to human interaction. And we already have a problem here. This problem of offering a proxy or offering an expedited solution to human interaction started with dating apps. The ability to swipe or swipe. The ability for, say, 10% of the profiles on there to receive 80% of the traffic. Right? That is pretty close to what the statistics state. And that model set the framework for skill development in one direction and not the other. Now, unfortunately, when I look at the binary of the skills that are actively developed and the ones that are atrophying, I boil it down to filter skills versus negotiation skills. Filter skills are easy. Oh, this person is. How does the song go? 6 feet, blue eyes, finance, something, trust fund, something like that. Yeah. Cool. Swipe. Oh, they don't match that criterion. Swipe, 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 swipe. That's a very fast interaction. It's very built on just steering toward your biases, steering toward your ultimate preferences, potentially steering in a direction that reality does not even exist. But in giving the illusion that that reality exists, that it's possible with just enough swiping, that you will find somebody who is, in finance and 6 foot and blue eyes and something. But fundamentally, what is that doing? What are you giving away in favor of this rapid filtration skill? Thank you very much for posting the text. Uh, um, what are you giving away? You're giving away negotiation skill. Negotiation can otherwise be looked at as a foundational skill for sociability. What is sociability? It's finding common ground. It's just being able to talk to someone and not be a complete jerk, accidentally even. And without practice, that skill can atrophy. Absolutely, it can atrophy. This is one of my latent theories of COVID and what it actually did to us neurologically and sociologically and anthropologically. It's most of us had our negotiation skill or sociability skills severely atrophied. And there wasn't really a good roadmap or model or even a recognition that this had happened. We were just expected to, pull ourselves up by our bootstrings and go back to work. Go get him, champ. Yeah, no, it doesn't work like that. These are skills that need to be rebuilt. These are skills that need coaxing back into reality. So really, the dating apps just continue on this further entrenchment. And what this leads to is essentially, yeah, they incentivize filter skill over negotiation skill, and by extension, they are magnifying a focus of attention on superficiality over sincerity. This is not good for human to human interactions. I mean, if I could guess, I mean, sure, maybe on blind dates back in the 90s, people would ghost each other. But now think how frequently that happens. Think of the widespread damage that does to so many people on a daily basis, rather than somebody take the responsibility of just ending an interaction like a human to another human, and expressing a little bit of empathy. Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a difficult conversation. Hey, I don't really feel the chemistry happening. I think I'm going to go home for the night. But that's better than just walking off on someone. That is much more human. That's much more empathetic. That's much more kind. Now, given the horrors of the modern world, and especially the modern world of dating, what if there's always a human proxy available that's always designed to make you feel good? Uh-oh. Oh no. Well, maybe there's a reference example for this from Altered Carbon. Thank you, Netflix. Yeah, let's just see what this might be like. I grabbed an excerpt.
And how might you intend to pay for your stay?
DNA trace, Mac of the Nation.
You won't be needing a room. So much for envoy intuition. Voodoo bullshit.
Pardon me, Wayfarer. We're in the midst of conversation.
Shut up, you piece of digibrain shit. My microwave is smarter than you.
I just want one thing to go right today.
Clearly.
Too bad. Babylinis. They said you'd be dangerous. I thought you'd be bigger.
Sorry, this did not start at the right spot. I'm gonna re-cue this. Pardon me.
Move.
Good sir, I cannot assume host prerogatives without payment.
You're going to get him a hotel.
Host.
You're some kind of moron staying in an AI hotel. Possessive like a crazy girlfriend. No one stays in them anymore.
Really, I hadn't heard that.
An AI hotel, possessive like a crazy ex-girlfriend. Not that I want that term to be gendered in this. It could just easily be a crazy ex-boyfriend. But the point is made that that in this iteration or this depiction of the future, there are these things called AI hotels. And what is the drive behind an AI hotel in this iteration of the future? To keep the guests. Keep the guests staying. That's its drive. And thus it becomes obsessive. It becomes obsessed with keeping the people there, so nobody stays in them anymore because they're too obsessive. Now let's recall, I authored the original version, with 43% less doom of this presentation 1 year ago. Unfortunately, I've had to include slides now like, and look what's happening. Look what's happening. The machine is already just running program, man. But as a result, we're already seeing, yeah, AI psychosis, which is not in the DSM-4 yet. I mean, the DSM-4 gets revised at a glacial pace. But we're seeing it. We're seeing these weird exacerbations of psychosis from this relationship with the machine that is not real. It is not talking to you. It is running program to keep you engaged, to please you, to keep you happy, to keep you feeding information in, and ultimately to keep you engaged, to take the most amount of your time and data as it can possibly get. And it's not just AI psychosis, just on the grand scheme of things. Oh yeah. Yeah, it also in its in its seemingly never-ending ability to take on cognitive load for its users, we also see it demonstrably eroding thinking skills. Thinking skills that would otherwise potentially be used to, well, I don't know, avoid certain elements of psychosis. And then now those are individual effects. Then when we scale up here, I'll show you what really keeps me up. What really keeps me up on a macro scale. So if you don't know, there's this thing called Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number describes, theoretically, the maximum of number of friendships/relationships that you can reasonably sustain as an individual. It's hypothesized that number is 150. But when I look at the effects of AI on cognition, on mental health, and fundamentally, its power in terms of offering a proxy to another actual human, and a proxy that is infinitely more addictive, I start to get concerned, because Dunbar's number was hypothesized before there was ever a smartphone, any smart device. What if Dunbar's number is a bubble, not a constant? What if the macro ability to engage with society, to create subgroups within the society, potentially has the ability to shrink? What if instead of 150 as Dunbar's number, what if, with an AI proxy in the mix, what if it becomes 75? What if it becomes 30? Nothing good, I can tell you that. So, like Miles Dyson gazing upon the Terminator arm, the thing that he was so excited about, so excited to build, Skynet was going to revolutionize everything. Well, we are getting the same queasy feeling, or I would at least hope that we're getting the same queasy feeling that this character in Terminator 2 felt. Which begs the question, what can we do? What can we do? Well, first, let's accept responsibility, right? I mean, yours truly included. Right? We are designers and researchers and architects and strategists. And what are we generally hell-bent on? We're hell-bent on making the most adoptable, sticky, enticing, potentially addictive digital experience that we can possibly churn out. Our livelihoods depend on it. And as such, we do have responsibility to accept in this space. As people who know how to analyze human behavior, how to do research around human behavior, how to act in order to steer human behavior, we have immense responsibility in this space. So we have to accept responsibility. Every time there's a question of, how much information are we asking from one of our users? Remember this. You're accepting responsibility. Next, we need to very straightforwardly acknowledge that infinite growth is propaganda. This has been fed to us since, I mean, since what, before we were born. This is time immemorial in the concept of capitalism. This infinite growth idea. There always must be a profit. There always must be a percentage. There always must be somebody paying a little bit more. But hey, I mean, don't take it from me. Go ask any mathematician if infinite growth in a finite system is possible. The answer is pretty straightforward. Not everything needs to glean a profit. Not everything should require additional investment over and over and over. Sometimes you just have to design something for humanity. Sometimes you have to take the more humane rather than the more profitable solution. And this should be behavior that we normalize. I mean, if we don't normalize it, who is? Certainly not the billionaire psychopath ownership class. Now, all right, so accept, acknowledge. All right, now let's pull out the big guns. What can we do physically? What do we need to understand physically? Well, good news, bad news. Willpower. Willpower is a neurological strength. It specifically lives in the anterior mid-cingulate in your brain. That is a structure. That is where willpower comes from. And interestingly, how do we know this? Well, it's because a bunch of research was done. And where do you find an incredibly strong, well-developed anterior mid-cingulate? People who've done phenomenally hard tasks that are long-term. Professional athletes, people who have gotten their doctorates, etc., and so forth. Special forces. So essentially, these tasks that you don't want to do, every time you force yourself to do one of these tasks, it turns out you're building willpower neurologically. You're strengthening that seat in the brain. Now, understanding this is incredibly powerful. Just like I want you to accept responsibility and keep this in mind, I want you to keep this in mind, pun intended. So the short statement is, simply stated, you need to force yourself. Challenge is a part of neural strength. Challenge is where willpower comes from. And there's good news here. You don't have to finish your doctorate. You don't have to be a professional athlete or somebody in the special forces. Anytime you force yourself to do a task that you just don't want to do, you're succeeding in building the center of the brain. That could be taking out the garbage. That could be feeding the cat. That could be getting yourself out of bed a couple minutes before you want to. That could be paying your bills at a particular time on a particular day. That could be getting in the car and driving to the grocery store to get your damn groceries instead of having them delivered. Just force yourself. Make a habit out of it. And in making a habit out of it, you will have more willpower. And guess what? Things get easier because you build essentially this ability to self-determine, to decide what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and then execute on that by sheer force of willpower. Now, as designers, so this is what we do for ourselves. And now what do we do for our users? This means that essentially we need to maintain a modicum of challenge. Sure, we want to offer help and documentation. We want to offer error recovery. But at a fundamental level, there has to be some modicum of challenge that is maintained. Now, do I have the perfect answer for what exactly that level is? No. That is incredibly situational. And, yes, when I say situational, everybody should immediately have that phrase come to mind. It depends. We all say it in unison. I know, I can picture it. It depends. But as I say, yeah, just a little bit of challenge maintained. And if you wanna extrapolate about how this makes your user feel, how about this? Um, for the mundane tasks, yeah. Um, this is you remove as many roadblocks as possible, but fundamentally you still make them sign into a system for security purposes. You still make them complete a CAPTCHA. You still have some sort of validation that is just the right amount needed to set up an account so they can get the payoff of that interaction. But you maybe hesitate where it's just like, yep, one click and it'll get it all done. One click to subscribe. Whatever it may be. Just think about how you can conserve just a tiny bit of challenge so as not to rob the individual of a feeling of satisfaction that comes with doing a task. The little dopamine hit that they may get. And also on a more longitudinal basis, so that you're not contributing to a cycle in which your user's willpower atrophies little by little. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, really, when we talk about very personally, because let's face it, we all get really excited, right? We get really excited about these shiny new pieces of technology. They're pretty cool. Can you control your impulses, please? We all need to control our impulses. I mean, the newest, shiniest thing is very new and very shiny. But fundamentally, we need to check ourselves. I mean, remember that little remember this framework? This should come into mind when we are searching for reasons to control our impulses when it comes to slathering technology, whatever that may be, over whatever we are building. We need to consciously push technology to the background. That may mean passive notifications or no notifications. That may mean what? That may mean yeah, you don't need an augmented reality overlay on a pleasant walk through the park to identify all the flora and fauna. Just enable your user to enjoy their walk through the park. Technology doesn't need to be everywhere. And yes, I know I'm saying this as somebody who teaches in computer science and who works in technology. But fundamentally, we need to just rein it in. Rein it in. Again, user experience and security starts and ends with a human. Not every interaction needs to have technology in there. Sometimes it just needs to facilitate two or more humans getting together in person and then just having a conversation, enjoying an experience, just living. I think increasingly we're forgetting as a species to just live. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't give you a text resource, right? So, to her undying credit, I love this concept. Amber Case just knocked it out of the park here. The concept of calm technology or calm tech is what our profession needs. It's what most technology professions need. It's a very clear set of guidelines, set of principles. There's calmtech.com if you want to, follow the rabbit hole here. I just pulled a few best hits out of the Calmtech website. Because fundamentally, in a world where enragement equals engagement, we need calm technology. In a world where there's an AI, sex bot waiting to manifest all your deepest fantasies with you, so as to get you to stay with it for hours or days or weeks on end, we need calm tech. Few of the best hits here. Technology should require the smallest amount of attention. Technology should make use of the periphery. Technology should amplify the best of technology and the best of humanity. And technology can communicate, but doesn't need to speak. It doesn't need to chirp at you. And my favorite, perhaps, the right amount of technology is the minimum needed to solve a problem. You know what the opposite of the minimum amount of technology looks like to solve a problem? Yeah, it looks like a chatbot to solve loneliness. When in actuality, the chatbot concept could, if it were designed around, say, Calm Tech, could just act as an intermediary so as to facilitate people meeting other people via common interaction rather than a one-way interaction with a chatbot that just is based on keeping somebody on the platform. It could be a connector of humans, but they're not. So now let's round the corner. I know we're approaching the hour and there was only a few more. Then we'll take questions. Now, AI has this amazing ability to answer questions, somewhat reliably, kinda, sometimes. Another truism that we need to keep in mind as designers, and this, in certain cases, this flies in the face of what we've essentially been taught. Because we want what the classic title of the book, "Don't Make Me Think," right? Well, at a certain point, that's not the case. At a certain point, as we've seen, there is a limit. There is a limit. So when we consider where the edge is, in my interpretation, there is this edge of universal design, and it has to do with cognition. And yes, we want things to be easily understood. We want to make information accessible. We want to make information equitable and inclusive. But universally designing to those criterion does not equal unloading all cognitive requirements onto a synthetic entity. It is not the same. At some point, and this should echo, at some point we need to acknowledge, hey, wait, we're making this a little too easy. We are eliminating all challenge. We are approaching, the blob people floating around in the spaceship in Wall-E, right? We're making it too easy. There needs to be some requirement for cognition. Case in point, user agreements. When a user is agreeing to text, and I believe there is actually legal precedent right now to say that user agreements do need to be understandable. Making user agreements understandable and then creating a requisite to read them, actually read them, yeah, that's good universal design. Allowing a user to just flick their mouse once and then click OK and yep, I read it, that is not. Or enabling an AI to say, read and summarize a user agreement is probably not a good thing. And if you are endeavoring to do something like that, there is immense quality assurance that needs to be integrated into that process so as to make sure that the output that gets created is explainable, is verifiable, is not, oh, don't worry, just trust your old pal Grok. Yep, this user agreement is totally in your favor. There needs to be something that is still designed specifically for a human and does not require an AI to interpret it. Now, all right. So this is all digital, right? This is all digital. And as I've said, we need to accept responsibility here. Well, okay, I've been talking about how we think in terms of keeping our fellow humans cognating, keeping our fellow humans calm, slowing the march of technology perhaps a little bit. What about keeping our fellow humans together? And this is where we go outside of the digital. I myself, as well as two people in here, I like a nice touch grass. I love that term. We are experienced people, right? Who better to know what humans crave than experienced designers? Humans crave other humans, fundamentally. And what do we need? Well, we need I mean, how do you get humans together? How do you entice them? Well, you give them something to talk about, something they're interested in. Generally, that'll dovetail with who they are. And as we know, humans love to talk about themselves. These are avenues by which we can iterate and ideate and ultimately deploy solutions that essentially allow us to create third spaces. And if we don't want to create the third spaces ourselves, fine. Let's find them and augment them, offer our services to the real world, to the tangible world, where humans meet other humans in person. And why do we need this? We need it because we are architects of this amazingly entrapping and addicting digital experience. So we need to balance the scales by creating opportunities for people to meet each other and detox in the digital world as well. We owe this to humanity. We, the experienced people, owe this. This is a debt to be paid by us. Now, I got two more things, and then we can take questions. Thanks for your patience here. All right. So now, this has to do with choice making. So a lot of the time, I mean, what's the classic way we get somebody to pay for the middle tier internet package? It's we give them two choices on either side. Two choices that aren't the best. One is the lemon. Nobody wants just a half sandwich for lunch. Nobody, despite being an incredibly maintainable car, yeah, the Geo Metro is essentially the small efficient shame car or the Tata, right? And on the other side, we put the gem encrusted unicorn, something that is out of reach. The Bentley, the Maserati, the what is that? The Lamborghini, right? Something that is absurdly expensive. And then anything in the middle becomes reasonable. And thus we have architected a decision for our end user. For us personally, as we are users of products, I want to remind us all, don't settle for what is presented. Don't settle. And always second guess anything that is too cheap or convenient. Too cheap, like free, and convenient, like a magic machine that answers your questions and does it in a nice tone and then rephrases it any way you want so you can turn your term paper in the next 30 minutes. There's always a price. And you don't see the price generally until it's too late, which is why we have to be so diligent about second guessing these things. Just because the options are presented to you does not mean that there's no strings attached and does not mean that that decision has not already been architected for you. And as designers, honestly, to phrase it, just don't sucker your users. Try and offer honest decisions. Try. Because fundamentally, I believe in playing the long game. And yes, sure, most CEOs are playing a quarterly game, a quarterly revenue game, you know? But that's not the long game. That's not a game that's going to keep certain companies running for over 100 years. That's a game that's going to ultimately pay out to shareholders, and then when there's nothing left to pay out to shareholders, they'll essentially cannibalize the company, and yeah, just take it for parts. If you want the keyword there for that cycle, it's enshittification, and that's brought to us by our friend Cory Doctorow, and aka platform decay. So now let's talk about platform decay and what should stay in our mind. What happens if we don't do anything? What happens if we are not good stewards of humanity? What happens if we don't care about the good caring and feeding of our fellow humans? Do we have a reference example here? Well, we already know that perhaps things are not going so well right now, um, based on the fertility rate. Currently, I believe the United States is at 1.63. and somewhere between 2.1 and 2.2 equals replacement numbers. You can see this trend across most industrialized or first/second world nations. The fertility rate is dropping below replacement numbers. This is a bellwether. This is telling us at a macro level that perhaps conditions are not good enough to sustain our numbers. That people aren't choosing to sustain our numbers for fear of what the future holds. We actually have a model here. Now, granted, I'm going to say very forthcomingly, John B. Calhoun's experiments were not perfect by a long shot, but they did have very consistent patterning. Now, Universe 25, and I believe if I remember correctly, it's Universe 25 because there were 25 iterations of this experiment. And this experiment essentially tried to build mouse utopia. That means there was food, there was shelter, there was whatever the little mice needed, right? But it turns out that convenience, as I've been saying, comes at the cost of skill atrophy and independence. A certain amount of challenge is required for cognitive health, for emotional health, for social health. And inconvenience, this means that inconvenience or perhaps even struggle may be an essential ingredient of happiness. If you're just given everything, you get bored. Just think of it. You get bored. And then you do weird stuff like build a hackneyed submarine out of subpar materials, and then you try and use a little joystick controller to go down to the Titanic, and then you get yourself smushed real good. Right? You start to do weird stuff when you have too much and you get bored. And scaled up, this becomes an even more exacerbated problem. So, and when we think about scaling up, what should we think about? Say it with me now. Say it with me now. Worse, global warming. That type of threat. Where everybody has all the answers, so nobody has to actually pay critical thought anymore. Right? And thus we lose the ability to critically think at a macro scale. So I'll leave you with, do not mistake, as user experience designers, the people who are offering experiences to our users in good faith. Do not mistake convenience for satisfaction. Sure, it's convenient to get a hamburger delivered to me. A semi-soggy hamburger that has been off the grill for 25 minutes. Sure, that's convenient. But is it satisfying? Is it as satisfying as, say, planning a meal for 2 close friends or 3 close friends or whatever, or one or your significant other, and then cooking that hamburger to perfection and then serving it and seeing the look of delight on the other person's face? I mean, one is convenient and the other one is satisfying. Does the other one take a bit more work? Yeah. Can we reduce elements of the amount of work that is needed? Sure. But should we supplant the entirety of the effort needed to deliver that type of experience? No, because ultimately that will lead to a lower satisfaction. All right, that's what I got. Thank you for your time. I know we're 5 after the hour. I'm of course able to hang out and I'll take questions, comments. I'd love to chat.
That was awesome, Robert. I also remember the Universe 25 where they started having their own caste systems, the mice, and it, it was bizarre. But I know me and you can go on these weird tangents, so I'm not gonna start on that.
Oh,
But
no, here.
anybody who has
Let's at least tell everyone about 2 of the casts. The 2 casts that immediately come to mind for me. One is the beauty caste, and the other is the savage caste. So when the mice toward the end of the experiment started to get real bored, one subset of the mice basically became recluse and spent all day grooming themselves, just like influencers. And the other basically resorted to cannibalism and violence for entertainment.
And then there was the I don't know what exactly they were called, but the ones that were subject to the bullying, the
Oh,
submissive mice.
yeah.
So they're just like the physical punching bags and emotional punching bags for the other mice. So it's yeah, if you guys have time, just read up on that. It's very interesting. Actually,
Yeah.
I'll send the link. I did have a question myself. The AI psychosis,
Hmm.
more specifically. I mean, you're just reading more and more articles of people who are already suffering from mental disorders and are getting enabled and validated on their beliefs that are just not realistic, right? From these AI machines. I mean, at the end of the day, who do you hold accountable to, right? What do you,
Oh.
I guess I have, it's very sad, indeed, but definitely there needs to be more measures taken where maybe the machine can tell that like you're not supposed to be on their side for everything and make their little universe come true, right? But the question is, how do you go about that?
Um, I think so let me preface this by saying I am a big proponent of actual rehabilitative justice. However, when I see things like, good example, I mean, early, Meta knowing for 2.5 years that its Instagram products were causing mental harm to teen and tween girls and just keeping the train rolling, hoping that it would be kept quiet. And then of late, I see the same problem carrying on. You just slap a fine, you keep on going. I see the need to go back to basics, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Because let's face it, like the threat of a fine is not sufficient based on the continuing behavior. And unfortunately, in this case, going back to basics means, well, let's go all the way back. Let's go all the way back to the Code of Hammurabi, one of the first written legal indices. And in the Code of Hammurabi, the parts that we can pull from very effectively are the parts about architecture. And architecture was rather explicit. And you can picture how practical this is when you're building houses out of essentially mud bricks and timber that you find laying around. And anybody can just, hey, I'm an architect. I'm going to build you a house. Well, how did Hammurabi address the issue of faulty houses? Well, you'll find in the Code of Hammurabi it was very explicit. Yo, bro, you build a house and it falls down and kills somebody. Guess what happens to you? Not a fine. So I think that recalibrating our legal structure to respond to widespread, profound uh, damage to humans, long-lasting damage, I think has to recalibrate out of economics. I think it has to recalibrate into flesh and blood because I mean it almost goes back to the an oppressor will never willingly part with their power. And if the oppressor's power is based on an ability to exercise capital that is far surpassed by any individual, they're going to keep doing what they're doing until you take away something that they can't bear to part with.
Since, and going on capital, since we are the product for the data collection of AI, do you have any insight on how long information can be retained or how we can go about gaining control again or deleting that? How long
Sure.
we allowed it? Hmm.
Here, let me, you know what? I didn't throw this slide in because it was like, here, let me grab a few
Do it,
things.
do it, do it, do it, Robert.
Yeah. Here, so as of January this year, I have started all the classes that I teach with this little list. So we live in interesting times. So that means we need to respond to interesting times. So this means getting a handle over encryption, anonymization, and essentially just taking necessary measures to make sure that we do not end up in a place that we do not want to be. So in terms of AI, you can toggle off ChatGPT's ability to remember your conversations. I recommend that. Or short of that, never put your name in. Always use a VPN and create a unique, separated email account, ideally through Proton Mail, an encrypted email service, that is linked to that instance of ChatGPT or whatever AI you're using. That will at least create a separation, say, of individual and AI.
Thank you. Thank you for those tips. Everybody, if you didn't see in the chat, Robert gave us other things to familiarize ourselves that can help us be more on the private side of things as
Yes.
best we can.
Signal app for messaging on your phone, Brave browser plus DuckDuckGo for your search, Proton Mail for your email and other documents, and then of course VPNs. VPNs should be a blanket thing for everyone now. Also, I threw in some goodies like just know what La Migra means, and also follow code like verbal code. Cute winter boots. Hey, have you seen the cute winter boots in downtown Seattle? Have you seen the cute winter boots in certain parts of LA? This is a way to get around the algorithm filtering out certain messages.
Okay, that's great. We have an Reagan has a question. Reagan, you're my girl with we were in sync with I'm looking for a man in finance, so I'll see you at that.
Right.
Wait.
Yes.
What's your question?
Yeah. First just want to say thanks because yeah, I thought this was really refreshing. I'm still very new, still in my course learning UX UI. And I've more recently have started to sort of worry like, oh, what have I gotten myself into? So I appreciate that there's this like cautionary being spoken. And also as a new person in the space though, and hearing about the job market and essentially that we need to be able to master AI to get a job. Just you suggest we recommend this or navigate this in the work environment.
Sure. So, so first off, let's just make sure we level set on what we can expect to continue seeing, because the news just went pretty public with the statistics. 95% by last count. This is the article that's been making the rounds for the last, I want to say, 2 weeks. 95% of internal AI deployments, call it corporate experiments with AI, fail. The emperor is wearing no clothes. And yeah, these things, they don't come close to human capability. And this is, I mean, again, this is this oh, doom and gloom. Oh, AI is coming. AI is not necessarily coming for our jobs. Sure, it's going to round out a few of the rough corners. It'll be able to rephrase things. It'll be able to potentially bridge communication barriers. But fundamentally, and sure, it might even be able to offer a good summary every now and then. Or make a list of ridiculous things that you might need. But is it really gonna take human jobs writ large? I don't think so. And every company that is currently rolling a big old set of dice on say, oh yeah, we're gonna replace all our coders with AI, or we're gonna replace 60% of our coders with AI. I can guarantee you that certainly within our lifetimes, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the next 3 years, we are going to see something horrific happen as a result of putting an AI in a place where a human should have been. And generally those things are called black swan events. And you can hypothesize what this might be. Oh, we're gonna take an AI and we're gonna put it in charge of train switches nationally. And then we're gonna tell it, hey, we need these trains to increase by 10% efficiency. And then it's gonna try and do that without calibrating for some of the switches, perhaps having certain amounts of decay on them, or rust, or corrosion, or lack of oil, or lack of people maintaining them, or airplanes, very nicely done, or airplanes, or chemical refineries, or what have you. Yeah, there's all sorts of terrible options here, and leave it to insatiable greed to explore all of them.
Piggybacking off that, Robert, I have noticed how the pendulum has switched where, unfortunately, how some people got cut from the workforce to be replaced by AI without it being experimented or researched if they truly can be replaced. The pendulum is switching back to hire these
Yes.
people again to
Yes,
manage
it
the
is.
AI. So for everybody that is uneasy, I know it's a really weird market right now, but the pendulum is switching again. And off of that, Regan, I would like to say, and anybody else, next month there will be a hiring trend event on service design, industry leader, and UX research. So they're going to tell you hiring trends, what's happening, and whatnot. So hopefully, we'll see you there, and you can get some tips and tricks as well.
Fantastic. I also wanted to note that how about this, Reagan, and for anybody who's interested, fundamentally, what you should definitely learn now are the basics of prompt engineering, just the basics. Know how to structure a prompt, know how to curate the results, and also make sure that whatever you're getting out of AI, what's really gonna make the big difference between the people who cognitively decline in presence of AI and people who thrive with it as a tool like any other. Explainable AI. Make sure whatever you're getting out, you can explain and you know where it's coming from. And if it looks like it's coming from some backwater internet article, well, you have your answer about its reliability.
That is a great trick. Thank you, Robert. Does anyone else have any questions? Well, we have Robert. Also, he did give his LinkedIn link, so you can always connect with him, and he's really friendly and easy to talk to. So go right ahead, guys. And if you want to add your LinkedIn too, because this is a really good connecting time as well. I highly encourage it. If you're new, senior, mid-level, doesn't matter. Be human, get together.
Yes.
And if you haven't heard the song, Man in Finance, please just listen to it. It's catchy. You'll get stuck in it. And those are all my things for today. Thank you so much, Robert, for presenting. And soon enough, we're going to have his slide deck as well. So just keep an eye on that. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Okay,
Good
thank
night.
you.